Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a former federal negotiator escapes to a remote cabin seeking peace, he expects silence. What he gets is war. A power-hungry HOA, a rogue security enforcer, and a false smear campaign ignite a battle for land, truth, and freedom. This isn't just a cabin, it's a line in the sand. It was early spring when I finally got the roof off. The snowmelt had loosened half the rafters, and a family of raccoons had taken residence above the old loft, turning the insulation into a hotel minibar. I'd been planning the tear-off all winter, sketching diagrams in a notebook while the wind howled through gaps in the cabin walls. Now, with the sun warm enough to sweat, but not hot enough to complain, I was on the ladder with a pry bar covered in cedar dust and stubborn satisfaction. This land, 10 acres of hickory ash and oak just south of Shenandoah, was mine outright. Bought it 2 years ago when I walked away from my old life. Federal disaster response, hostage negotiations, too many radios screaming in my ear. After one incident too many, I needed out. Out of the system, out of traffic, out of reach. The cabin was a skeleton when I bought it, listed as off-grid cabin use only in the county records. No power lines, no plumbing, no neighbors for at least half a mile. Perfect. I brought in a Honda generator, installed a composting toilet, buried a septic barrel with gravel filtration, and wired up solar for low-draw lights. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional, honest, quiet. That was until I noticed the car. A black Audi SUV with tinted windows parked half on the gravel trail that cuts between my property and the logging easement. It sat there for a while, too long to be lost, not long enough to be someone brave enough to knock. I didn't think much of it. A lot of the Maple Hollow HOA folks like to cruise up this way and peek into the woods like it was a zoo exhibit. Look, honey, a recluse in the wild. I kept working. 2 days later, I found a large white envelope tucked under a stone by the gate. No stamp, no address. Just to occupant. Inside was a printed letter on HOA letterhead. Maple Hollow HOA, complete with a serif-heavy logo that looked like it had been designed by someone with too many throw pillows and a Pinterest board titled Forest Chic. The letter was signed by one Karen Eldridge, president. I read it twice, then again, just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke. She demanded I remove the unauthorized perimeter fencing, which obstructs the ecological corridor between sectors 11 and 12. Cease usage of non-permitted off-grid power sources. Consult the HOA's architectural committee to harmonize the visual presence of my structure with the aesthetic values of the community. And, this one was bold, vacate the parcel until such time that zoning compatibility can be reviewed by Maple Hollow's expansion committee. I stood there in my boots, still, smelling of pine resin and gasoline, staring at the letter like it had come from another planet. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. This woman thought she had jurisdiction over my cabin, a place a full mile from the edge of her pastel kingdom. I walked inside, set the letter down, and pulled out the laminated deed, tax map overlay, and my printed parcel number from the county's GIS site. I highlighted the line that stated private land, zoned for agricultural and recreational cabin use, not subject to HOA covenant or easement. Then I got to work. I scanned the letter and sent it to my lawyer in town just for record keeping. Then I drafted a reply, nothing dramatic. Just a firm statement that she was mistaken, I was not part of her association, that any further attempts to enforce rules would be considered harassment, and that unauthorized entry onto my property would be treated as trespassing under state law. I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, and kept a copy in my property file. I also added a new sign to the gate, black letters on weathered pine. Private property not part of Maple Hollow. Trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. Below it, I bolted a motion sensor light, a trail camera, and a decoy camera just for fun. People who ignore signs tend to notice blinking red lights. I figured that would be the end of it. It never is. It was exactly 8 days after the letter, long enough for me to hope she'd taken the hint, and short enough for me to know better. I was walking the west edge of the property, checking on a dead ash I planned to take down, when I heard voices coming from the old logging trail that bordered the ridge. At first, I thought maybe hikers had wandered off course. Happens now and then. But then I caught a glimpse of 2 men stepping over my corner post like it was a line in the sand that didn't apply to them. One of them was tall and broad, wearing a camo jacket over a tactical vest like he'd been pulled out of a surplus catalog. He had a radio clipped to his chest and sunglasses that tried too hard. The other guy was thinner, clipboard in hand, wearing a high-vis vest with property consultant printed on the back in large block letters. They were talking in loud, confident voices as if narrating a tour for an invisible crowd. I stepped out of the brush and said, loud and clear, "Gentlemen, you're on private land. I'm going to need you to turn around." The big one spun around first. He scanned me from head to toe, lips tight. "You, the guy in the cabin?" "I am. This is my land. You're trespassing." He smirked and took a few steps toward me. "Doug Eldridge, Maple Hollow Security Committee. That's not a thing. There's no official body in an HOA called a security committee, and even if there was, it sure as hell wouldn't have jurisdiction here." Doug didn't seem to care. He pulled a folded printout from his vest and held it out. "According to our revised community planning overlay, this area falls within our expansion boundary. That fence you put up, it's obstructing projected access lanes. I didn't take the paper. You'll want to move it." Sooner rather than later, I laughed once, short and sharp. "You people have lost your minds." The guy with the clipboard, no name offered, was walking along the property line, scribbling notes and taking pictures with his phone. He pointed at my solar panel rack. "That's got to be code non-compliant." "It's not your code to worry about," I snapped. "And unless you've got a warrant or a sheriff with you, I suggest you leave." Doug didn't budge. "Listen, pal, I know how this works. I used to be law enforcement." "That's funny," I said. "I used to negotiate with people holding shotguns to other people's heads, and even they had more respect for boundaries than you do." He stepped closer, just enough to get into my space. Not touching, not quite, but his chest squared like he wanted me to flinch. I didn't. Instead, I raised one hand slowly, not toward him, but toward the small drone controller clipped to my belt. "You've been recorded since you stepped foot past that fence," I said. "Audio, video, GPS tagged." That got a reaction. His lips tightened, and I saw the shift, the barely contained twitch of someone who wasn't used to being told no and didn't know what to do with it. Then he shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, just a one-handed chest bump, like a dog marking a tree. But it was enough. Enough to move me back a step. Enough to get his fingerprints on me. Enough to wake a decade of trained response that I'd buried under dirt and tools and quiet living. I didn't touch him. I didn't yell. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and dialed the sheriff. While the line rang, I said calmly, "You just committed assault on private property in front of a drone and 2 trail cameras. You should start walking." Doug snorted. "This is your idea of law?" "No," I said. "But I'm calling someone who still wears the badge legally." The clipboard guy finally looked nervous. He whispered something to Doug and started backing toward the fence line. Doug didn't move. I could see the gears grinding in his head, whether to double down or cut his losses. In the end, the sound of the sheriff's department answering the call seemed to make the decision for him. He turned and walked. By the time the deputy rolled up 20 minutes later, I had the footage queued, the deed printed, and the property boundaries pulled up on the county GIS overlay. To my mild surprise, the responding officer was someone I vaguely recognized. Deputy Harris, younger guy, used to sit in on my negotiation classes back when I did training seminars. He looked from me to the drone footage, then back again. "Doug Eldridge?" he asked. "That's him." Harris nodded slowly. "Yeah, heard the name. He's been trying to revive a neighborhood watch out in Maple Hollow. Real gung-ho. He just crossed my fence line, made threats, and put his hands on me." "Yeah," Harris said, looking down at the screen. "I see that. He made a few calls, took my statement, then said the words I'd been waiting for all day. We're going to detain him for questioning. Assault and trespass are both chargeable here. You want to press?" "I do." Harris nodded again, calm and efficient. "We'll process it." I handed over a USB drive with the drone footage, the printouts of my land registration, and a copy of the certified letter I'd sent to Karen. Harris bagged the evidence, made a few notes, and promised a follow-up. By the time he left, the sun was low and the wind was picking up through the trees. I stood on the ridge where Doug had tried to claim jurisdiction and looked out at the empty trail. They weren't going to stop. That much was clear, but neither was I. It was the silence the next morning that made me suspicious. Normally, even out here, there's a rhythm. Squirrels chattering in the branches, a hawk's cry up above, wind brushing the tin roof just enough to let you know the forest is alive. But that morning, everything felt held back. Like the woods were waiting to see what would happen next. I was repairing the rain diverter on the back wall of the cabin, wrench in one hand, drill in the other, when my phone buzzed inside. I wiped my hands on my shirt and ducked in to check. Missed call, unknown number, voicemail. I hit play. The robotic transcription was already halfway down the screen. This is Officer Patel with the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Department. We received a public safety report regarding a possibly armed, unstable male living in an unregistered structure near Maple Hollow. Caller advised that subject may suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and poses a risk to nearby communities. Deputies are being dispatched for a wellness check. If this is a misunderstanding and you are able to verify identity and location, please call us at... I didn't need to hear the rest. I called back immediately and got routed to dispatch. I gave my name, my parcel number, and calmly explained that I was not only the subject of the call, but that I had never requested a wellness check and had no known mental health issues. The dispatcher sounded both skeptical and overly polite, standard when someone might be armed. I gave them my badge history, my ID number from federal service, the name of Deputy Harris, and offered full cooperation. They were already on their way. 15 minutes later, a cruiser eased down my gravel path. 2 deputies stepped out, hands nowhere near their holsters but moving slow, deliberate. One of them was an older man, balding, square-jawed. The other, tall, lean, with a slight limp, was someone I hadn't seen in years. "Clint?" the taller one asked, tilting his head. "Clint Rowan?" I squinted. "Taylor." I hadn't seen him since the Gulf floods, back when we were both still working incident response zones. He'd been a rookie then, all nervous elbows and clean boots. Now he looked like someone who'd seen a few things. "Small damn world," he said. "Let's talk." We sat on the porch while I handed over my ID, hunting license, generator permit, solar documentation, firearms storage certification, even the composting toilet compliance letter from the county health office. I ran a tight ship, even if that ship had moss on the shingles. Taylor whistled. "This is more organized than half the cabins on the registry." The other deputy, Daniels, kept quiet, walking the perimeter, noting the cameras, the lockbox, the posted parcel ID, the drone pad with launch markers. Everything legal. Everything clean. "So," I said, "am I officially a threat to suburban harmony now?" Taylor snorted. "The caller described you as a bearded man in military fatigues with a possible rifle. So basically anyone who's ever gone hiking. They also claimed you'd shouted at children and were seen talking to yourself in the woods." "That last part might have been me yelling at the raccoons," I said. "They steal my MRES." Daniels cracked a smile. I showed them the drone footage of Doug from yesterday, the certified HOA letter, and the parcel boundaries from the county overlay. Taylor leaned back and muttered, "Oh, for Christ's sake. Karen Eldridge? She's the one who called in," I asked. Taylor didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. He looked at Daniels, then back at me. "We've had 3 similar calls in the last year," he said. "All turned out to be, let's say, exaggerated. Same caller, different targets. Usually anyone not manicured enough to blend in sounds like harassment." He nodded. "Or worse, if we'd come in hot." Daniels stepped forward. "What do you want us to do?" I stood. "Honestly, just log it. Officially. I want the complaint on file. The footage, too. And I'd like a recommendation for a no-contact order for both her and her husband. I'm not looking for a war, but I'm not playing defense forever." Taylor nodded. "We'll file the report." "And Clint? Yeah? Lock your gates tonight." They got in their cruiser and backed down the trail. I stood there for a while, arms crossed, watching the tree line. I wasn't scared. But I was done pretending this was just some neighborly misunderstanding. That evening, I sat at my workbench and installed motion alarms on the north fence, the one closest to Maple Hollow. I reprogrammed the drone for automatic patrol sweeps every hour from dusk till dawn. I checked the battery bank, rewired the inverter, and updated my camera firmware. Then I printed out a new sign for the front gate. It read, "You are being recorded. This property is not abandoned. This property is not yours." It was the kind of humid afternoon that made wood swell and tempers rise. The air smelled like summer rot, wet leaves, distant ozone, and too much cut grass. I was on my back porch, tightening down the bolt on a rafter bracket, when my phone buzzed again. Caller ID said unknown, which now felt less like mystery and more like routine. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, I got a text from Deputy Taylor. "You'll want to hear this one. Call me." I did. He picked up on the second ring. "We're heading to Maple Hollow." "You're not going to believe this Karen again? She made a follow-up call this morning. Claimed you were digging pits with barbed wire around your property." I paused. "I'm reinforcing my garden fence with chicken wire." "Yeah, we figured," he said, "but we're going to swing by her place anyway." Wanted you to know, 15 minutes later, I heard the first cruiser siren echo faintly from down the valley, then saw dust curling into the sky from the direction of Maple Hollow. Out of sheer curiosity, I sent the drone up, not high, just enough to see the HOA's perimeter road. And there it was, 2 cruisers parked diagonally across Karen Eldridge's pristine, mulch-lined driveway. The house itself was a 2-story colonial nightmare with fake shutters and hydrangeas that looked like they were ordered from a catalog. I zoomed in slowly, no people in sight, until a shape lurched across the porch, swinging something heavy. I increased the drone's altitude and adjusted the camera angle. There, clear as day, was Doug Eldridge, shirtless, pacing back and forth, holding a beer in one hand and a shovel in the other. He stomped, yelled, swung the shovel into the porch railing so hard the baluster split. Karen stood nearby, phone in hand, either filming him or frantically texting someone, likely the HOA board or their pool boy lawyer. Doug kicked over a planter, then, with zero hesitation, hurled the shovel across the yard. It hit the siding with a hollow thunk. One of the officers stepped out of the cruiser, hand already resting on his holster, and called out something I couldn't hear. Doug turned, eyes wild, and walked toward them with the kind of posture that says, "I dare you." I knew that posture. Doug picked up another object, looked like a garden hoe, and began shouting, gesturing like a man running out of vocabulary and patience all at once. The officer took a stance. Doug took one step too far. From the drone's eye, it happened fast. Doug raised the hoe over his head, and before he could swing, a flash of movement from the cruiser. Non-lethal takedown. He hit the grass face first with a wet thud. Limbs sprawled, metal clattering from his grip. Officers moved in, fast and controlled, cuffed him before Karen even screamed. I watched as she darted forward, screeching something that looked dramatic and legally useless. She pointed at the officers, at the house, at her husband writhing in indignation, and then back toward the woods, as if she could summon me from the trees like some mythical beast. Taylor called me a half hour later. "You're not going to believe how many priors that guy has," he said, almost sounding impressed. "One for assault on a contractor, one for obstruction during a building code inspection, and a couple sealed from his time in Richmond. Guy's been holding it together with duct tape and spite." "And she called him her security committee," I muttered. "She also told the arresting officer you'd provoked his trauma response by staring at him aggressively through a camera." From a mile away, I didn't respond. I was too busy rewatching the drone footage on loop, noting the timestamp, the audio pickup, the exact moment Doug chose violence while Karen tried to manufacture a legal narrative from fantasy. "Want to file for a no contact?" Taylor asked. "I already drafted the paperwork," I said. We hung up. I sat for a while in the dark cabin, drone controller still warm in my hand, watching the playback flicker across the screen. Doug's rage was uncoordinated, theatrical, the kind of outburst that said he hadn't just snapped today. He'd been cracking for years, and now he'd finally cracked in full view of law enforcement. Later that night, I typed out a letter to my attorney summarizing everything. The trespass, the shove, the fake HOA expansion map, the assault with a tool, the false report about my mental state, and now, domestic unrest spilling over into criminal action. I attached the drone footage, titled the folder Eldridge_Escalation, and backed it up twice. As I saved the file, a new notification popped up on my motion alert system, movement near the north fence. I clicked it open. Just a deer. But the timing was poetic. By sunrise the next day, my inbox had 4 new messages. One from Deputy Taylor with the incident report, one from the county records office confirming a copy of the Eldridge police file was being prepared, and 2 from a civil attorney I'd worked with once before, Maya Thorne, sharp as barbed wire and silk. Maya didn't waste time. Her subject line said it all. "Let's burn this paper trail into the ground." We scheduled a call for 9 a.m. I brewed coffee with rainwater that had filtered overnight through my roof catch and charcoal barrel. I sat on the porch, laptop open, drone charging, shotgun propped against the wall, not because I expected anything, but because Doug's mugshot hadn't soothed the neighborhood tension. Maya came in hot. "Clint, this is textbook harassment. Trespass, threats, false reporting, character defamation, and now escalation to physical violence. We're going after them civilly, and I want to include the HOA as a complicit entity." I raised an eyebrow. "Maple Hollow HOA officially denies jurisdiction over my land, claims I'm just a concerning presence nearby," she laughed. "And yet they issued written demands, claimed regulatory authority, and sent a private citizen to enforce it with violence. That's a rogue HOA operation pretending to be a government." We broke down the next steps. I'd filed 2 restraining orders, one against Doug Eldridge for physical threat and trespassing, another against Karen for malicious abuse of emergency services and coordinated harassment. Maya would file a preliminary civil suit citing defamation, emotional distress, and attempted property interference. I forwarded her all my drone footage, the HOA letter, the recorded call transcripts, and screenshots from Doug's meltdown on the porch. She said it was more than enough. That same afternoon, 2 things happened within an hour. First, a new letter arrived, hand-delivered, not mailed, taped to my fence gate, HOA letterhead. This one wasn't signed by Karen, but by the HOA's vice president, a man named Jace Reddington, whose name sounded like a villain from a bad legal drama. It read, "Dear occupant, in light of recent disturbances near the Maple Hollow boundary, and given our HOA charter's commitment to preserving neighborhood harmony and environmental stewardship, we formally request that you cease all unsanctioned activity that may disturb local wildlife or pose a risk to nearby families. This includes loud equipment, visible firearms, and intimidating signage. Please consider a voluntary inspection by our architectural committee to ensure your dwelling aligns with community values." No joke. Voluntary inspection. I scanned it, uploaded it to Maya, and added it to my growing digital folder titled Delusional Paper Trail. Then the second thing happened. Deputy Daniels returned. This time he came solo in an unmarked vehicle, plain clothes. I met him halfway up the trail with a curious look. "I'm off shift," he said, "but wanted to give you a heads up. There's something swirling in the HOA office." Karen's trying to frame this whole thing as a safety intervention gone wrong, claiming Doug was acting as an auxiliary safety officer. Apparently, she's lobbying to have the charges reduced on the grounds of civil authority overreach. I laughed. Didn't know suburban paranoia came with badges now. Daniels didn't laugh. She's trying to muddy the waters. Word is she's even contacted a local environmental nonprofit to pressure the county about your solar panels and generator, claiming you're creating illegal runoff into the watershed. I exhaled slowly. It's a gravity-fed system. I built a bio-sand filter. My discharge is cleaner than a public pool. I know, he said, but this isn't about truth. It's about creating noise. I nodded. Then let's make my signal louder. That night, I updated every camera on the property to loop to a cloud backup. I printed laminated signs with legal citations referencing parcel sovereignty, recorded threats, and HOA jurisdiction limits per Virginia State Code. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a firewall. And then I wrote one more sign, just for me. I nailed it inside the cabin, above the door. They came for peace, but forgot I came for peace too. 3 days later, I was sitting on my cabin porch watching the morning fog slither low across the underbrush when I got an email from Maya marked urgent. Subject, "You're gonna want to see this." The attached file was an audio clip trimmed down to just over 2 minutes. The voice was unmistakable. Karen Eldridge. Maya had obtained it from the county prosecutor's office, who had received it from one of the officers involved in Doug's arrest. The audio was from Karen's initial 911 call the morning Doug lost his mind on the porch. Her voice dripped with performative panic. "Yes, there's a man in the woods behind our neighborhood. He's armed. He has mental health issues. He lives alone in some kind of shack. He's been digging pits around his property. I think he's trying to trap someone." "It's not safe." She paused, then lowered her voice in a way she clearly thought was conspiratorial. "If you don't get someone out here soon, I can't be responsible for what might happen." It wasn't just a lie. It was calculated character assassination, and it had finally crossed the line into criminal false reporting. By mid-afternoon, Maya had filed an official complaint to the state attorney's office citing malicious misuse of emergency services. She also formally requested that Karen's prior emergency call logs be released for pattern review. The judge approved the request within hours. That's when everything cracked wide open. Turns out Karen had made 3 other calls over the past year, each one about a dangerous male in or near the woods. None of those reports had been substantiated. One had been about a Latino teenager birdwatching with binoculars. Another was about a hiker who looked like he might be homeless because he wore flannel and had a beard. The third was a dispute over a neighbor who built a deer blind on his own land, a full half-mile from Maple Hollow. That gave Maya exactly what she needed: a pattern of false reports, racially biased assumptions, and public resource abuse. It wasn't just HOA harassment now, it was a civil rights issue in disguise. We filed an emergency restraining order that included non-contact via law enforcement proxy, meaning Karen couldn't even send cops on my behalf again without triggering a contempt charge. The judge signed it the next morning. Later that same day, I got a knock on the cabin door. It wasn't law enforcement. It wasn't Maya. It was someone new, a woman in her 50s, glasses, work boots, and a clipboard under her arm. "Name's Darlene Cruz," she said. "I'm with the state auditing team. We're conducting a compliance investigation into Maple Hollow, HOA. You're not under review, but your name came up. You mind if I ask a few questions?" I invited her inside. She sat, opened her file, and began calmly going through a list of topics: HOA jurisdiction maps, Karen's letters, the transition zone that didn't exist on any county record, and the fact that multiple invoices from the HOA had been issued with charges to properties outside of their legal boundaries. "I'm guessing you didn't pay the one addressed to you?" she asked. "Didn't even open it," I said. "I've got video of me throwing it in the compost." She smirked. "Good instinct." Then she pulled out a flash drive. "This is something you may find interesting. Anonymous drop-off to our office last week. Appears to be internal HOA emails. You didn't hear that from me." She slid the flash drive across the table. I plugged it into my laptop the moment she left. Inside was a treasure trove, emails from Karen to the HOA board, several referring to me as the squatter, forest militia, and, my favorite, the bearded sovereign. In one, she wrote, "We have to apply pressure. If the authorities won't act, we'll have to be the authority. If Doug has to scare him a little to get him moving, so be it. Sometimes the system needs a nudge." That email alone was enough to blow the case wide open. I forwarded it to Maya, the prosecutor, and the sheriff's office. Within hours, I got a call from the county investigator. "We're freezing HOA activity pending further review." This thing goes deeper than we thought. It started like a slow landslide, quiet cracks, small tremors, the illusion of stability. But by the end of the week, Maple Hollow HOA wasn't just under investigation, it was hemorrhaging. 3 board members resigned within 48 hours, not out of moral awakening, but self-preservation. One of them left a note in the HOA office mailbox. "I didn't sign up for a witch hunt. You're on your own, Karen." The county's investigation uncovered unauthorized dues collections, phantom maintenance fees, and one particularly bold maneuver, charging residents for fire risk mitigation patrols, which was just Doug walking around in camo pretending he was Smokey the Bear with a badge. Doug, of course, was still in county lockup, denied bail due to the audio, drone video, and a surprise third-party witness, one of his own ex-deputy colleagues who'd come forward with a statement about Doug's disciplinary history of escalating minor disputes into armed confrontations. The man was tired of seeing Doug's face pop up in court transcripts and said so in a blistering affidavit. Karen, she went quiet. Too quiet. For 3 days, she stopped calling, stopped emailing, even stopped her daily passive-aggressive nature patrols along the edge of my property. At first, I assumed she was lawyered up. But then Deputy Daniels texted me, "Karen's been posting on Nextdoor again." Brace yourself. It was a thread titled "When Dangerous Men Hide in Plain Sight," and it was a masterpiece of deflection. She claimed the state was being manipulated by a forest survivalist with PTSD and an online militia following, that her HOA was the victim of a smear campaign, and that certain law enforcement officers had been corrupted by rural radicals. She included photos of my cabin taken without permission, photos of me hunting from public social media, and even a blurry still from my own drone footage where I appeared shirtless fixing a solar panel. She captioned that one, "Unstable and possibly armed." It went viral, comments exploded, half the neighborhood clutched pearls, the other half clutched popcorn. But the most important thing was what came next, because 2 former HOA residents chimed in. Karen did the same thing to my cousin in 2020. She tried to force my mom to paint her house a more natural tone or pay a fine. Our land isn't even within HOA borders, and then, boom. A local journalist picked up the thread. A guy named Ellis Granger ran a blog called Civil Threshold, small time but well respected. He emailed me directly asking for an interview. I agreed, on 2 conditions. He used only verified documents, and he brought a county rep to fact-check any claims from my end. He agreed. The article dropped that weekend. The Sovereign Shack, one man's fight against HOA overreach in Shenandoah. It exploded. Within hours, I had interview requests from local news stations, state-level housing rights advocates, and a group of off-grid landowners who invited me to join their legal coalition. One lawyer even offered to file a class action lawsuit against Maple Hollow on behalf of other abused property owners. Karen tried to issue a public statement through her lawyer. It was a rambling, over-polished monologue about misunderstandings and overzealous enforcement of environmental standards. No one bought it. The county finally acted. The Board of Supervisors held an emergency meeting and voted to temporarily suspend Maple Hollow HOA's operational charter pending full audit. That night, someone spray-painted a message on the Maple Hollow welcome sign in huge white letters. "The Woods remember." I didn't do it, but I smiled. The court date came faster than expected. Karen tried to delay it twice, citing mental distress and unfair media coverage, but the judge wasn't having it. The evidence was already stacked like dry cordwood: false police reports, unauthorized surveillance, jurisdictional overreach, and, of course, Doug's full-blown backyard meltdown, caught in glorious HD by 2 police body cams and my drone's overhead feed. The courtroom was small, old-fashioned, full of polished wood and stale coffee breath. I sat beside Maya, who had built a rock-solid civil case on top of the criminal charges the state had already levied against the Eldridges. Doug wasn't even present. He was still in custody, awaiting his separate trial for assault, resisting arrest, and unlawful threats against an officer. Karen sat 3 rows ahead of me, hands clenched in her lap, a lawyer on each side of her. Her face looked like it had been stretched too tight over her bones. No makeup this time, no pearls. The prosecutor started with the audio. Karen's 911 call played through the speakers for the room to hear. You could hear a pin drop. Then came the emails from the flash drive, then the property maps, county records, drone footage, and the social media smear campaign. Finally, Maya called the sheriff himself to the stand. He explained clearly and calmly how not only had Karen lied about my presence being illegal, but that she knew it wasn't true and had fabricated the transition zone concept herself to justify harassment. The judge didn't even need a recess. In under 20 minutes, she rendered her decision. Karen Eldridge was guilty of false reporting, civil harassment, abuse of process, and public endangerment. Doug's charges would proceed separately, but his actions were directly tied to her encouragement of vigilantism. Maple Hollow HOA was to be dissolved, pending full state review of its finances and operations. Karen herself was sentenced to 10 months in state custody, plus 2 years probation and permanent restriction from participating in any HOA governance. And then came the kicker. The judge issued a protective buffer order around my land. 200 yards in all directions, recognized by the county as a safety perimeter due to previous coordinated harassment registered in both county and state land use systems. No organization, HOA, or individual could claim authority, install surveillance, or step onto that buffer without explicit, written, notarized consent. It was the first ruling of its kind in Shenandoah history. When I got home, the woods were silent again. I chopped firewood for 2 hours straight, not because I needed to, but because I could. No eyes watching, no distant binoculars, no HOA letters taped to a fence post with smug legal threats written in Comic Sans. That weekend, I built a new front porch, reclaimed wood, metal railing, smooth cedar oil. I bolted a custom-made steel sign into the frame just beside the front steps. It read, "You are being recorded. Trespassers will be educated. Legal department, me." A month later, people from 3 counties over started showing up. First, it was an older couple from Hardy County, asking how I got my HOA shut down. Then a young woman from Augusta who'd been fined for hanging a hammock on common property. Word had spread, not just about the lawsuit, but about me. About the man who stood his ground and won. About the drone. About the dogged lawyer. About the off-grid loner who wasn't crazy, just done being pushed. I never planned to become anything more than a quiet man in the woods. But now folks came to my cabin to learn how to fight back. Not with fists, with facts, with filings, with proof. And if the world wanted to call me the bearded sovereign, I'd take it. But I preferred a different title, landowner.